Welcome to The Alternative Investor. Recently, some analysts like JPMorgan noted that the unrest that ripped through parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal will force the economy to contract by 3% in the third quarter and drag down full-year growth. While ratings agency Moody said the unrest was likely to prove costly in terms of damage to property and would dampen subdued confidence and weigh on broader economic activity. At the same time, S&P Global Ratings said that the events did not bode well for the investment climate. For now, we're going to talk about how investors view South Africa. And to have that conversation, we are joined by Stuart Theobald, who is the chairman at Intellidex. Stuart, thank you so much for your time. Let's talk about the way investors viewed South Africa pre-COVID versus now.
Look, South Africa is an attractive market in many respects. It provides a middle-income country, a constitutional democracy, and a strong financial sector infrastructure in the form of a liquid capital market like the JSE, a strong legal system around that, as well as supporting services and custody and similar. So South Africa is an emerging market. It competes for investors against other emerging markets, and it has a reasonably compelling offering. I mean, that has been the case for the country since democracy. Of course, over the last decade particularly, that case has been undermined on several fronts. So the state capture years certainly undermined respect for the quality of institutions, the criminal justice system, corruption in the country, and that has been harmful. And the process of rebuilding post the state capture years has been the focus of the last few years, and that is very much an ongoing project. And that project has run into the COVID crisis, and then, of course, the violence of last week as the next major headwind to hit it.
So in 2018, we had President Cyril Ramaphosa outlining the investment drive and hoping to raise a target of about, I think, $100 billion in new investments over 5 years. How has that drive become more difficult now for him?
So I think it's important to just think about two different kinds of investment. So on the one hand, you have portfolio flows, which is big institutional investors who are running money on behalf of other people, who move money to markets where they believe there is a good risk-adjusted return on offer. And they would invest onto the JSE, into shares and bonds and similar. And then you get a different kind of investment we call foreign direct investment. And that's when largely companies invest in putting real infrastructure on the ground. So if they're going to invest in building a new factory, and similar, buying South African companies where they're actually going to run them, we see that as foreign direct investment. Now, the president's investment drive has largely been focused on that latter kind of investment, to attract big multinationals to choose South Africa as the destination for their activities, and as a result, directing investment into building infrastructure and creating infrastructure in the country. And the ideal example, for instance, is the major Amazon center that is going to be built in Cape Town. So that kind of foreign direct investment and that portfolio investment are affected differently. Portfolio investment is really concerned about the macro fundamentals of the country. What does our government balance sheet look like? Overall, what is the economic growth trajectory, and so on. Whereas FDI investors really have to think about what the conditions are on the ground before they make their investment. So the violence of last week has really been a big shock to many of those investors who have had infrastructure on the ground in KZN and Gauteng and watch that infrastructure being destroyed. And whether it's the big international car companies that have factories in KZN that have been affected, or other big electronics manufacturers and so on, or big retailers who have had infrastructure affected, that is a major blow to their confidence that South Africa is a safe place for them to put their investment money.
Right. Before I let you go, Stuart, rating agencies have been talking about reforms in South Africa. From your perspective, have you seen meaningful change from a reform side?
Yeah, so we have been making some progress, right? So energy security is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country. And big reform announcements like the 100 megawatt licensing threshold that will allow any company to generate their own electricity up to 100 megawatts is a very big change that can move quite quickly towards stabilizing energy availability in the country. That kind of change is really important. We need to advance on spectrum auctions to improve access to broadband. We need improvements in how skilled visas work so we can bring skills into the country more easily. Those sorts of reforms are happening and are really important to the overall position of the country. And they really affect the macro appeal of the country in a global investment market. I think what we saw last week is a safety and security issue.
Yeah.
And that's a new issue we now really need to focus on and address, particularly if we're going to stabilize foreign direct investment that is going towards those areas in particular. And that's now got to be part of the list of priorities.
Stuart, always a pleasure catching up with you. That is Stuart Theobald, who is the chairman of Intellidex, giving us his perspective in terms of where investors see South Africa. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more news for you with my colleague Nompumelelo Sizibu.